I'd like to welcome everybody to this week's Bearcat Chat. For those who don't know me, my name is John Alisi. I am the head men's basketball coach and the assistant athletic director for facilities. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker, Coach Bob Walsh from Providence College. Coach Walsh is currently in his second stint, I believe, at Providence. He's been a head coach for 13 years, 8 successful years, or 9, I believe, at Rhode Island College, Division III school in Providence, and was also the head coach at the University of Maine. He's won over 60% of his games in 13 seasons as a head coach, with 11 league titles and 8 trips to the NCAA tournament. In addition to his coaching, Coach Walsh is the founder of the Dynamic Leadership Group. I will let him speak a little bit more about what they do, and also runs a successful blog, coachbobwalsh.com, and is soon to be author. Will be publishing his book on leadership this December, so keep an eye out for that. But without further ado, I'd like to turn the Zoom seminar over to Coach Bob Walsh. Coach, thanks for being here.
Appreciate it, Coach. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for your time. I certainly understand it's valuable. And obviously, this is something that's a passion of mine, and conversations that I enjoy having. And, I think you can all see my screen. If for some reason you cannot, just let me know. But as Coach said, you're on mute, but I do want this to be interactive, so I will ask some questions. And I want to start with, just to get you thinking a little bit about your definition of leadership, and what you think leadership is. Leadership is blank. How would you fill in that blank? And we'll go around and see if anybody wants to share their thoughts on that after you've had a minute to think about it. But a little bit about how this all came about. I've been a basketball coach since I was in college. I actually grew up in New York. I went to high school. I went to Regis High School on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and then to Hamilton College in Central New York, and started coaching there when I was a junior, because the 2 point guards ahead of me were better than me, and quite honestly was no longer going to be able to play very much. And I've been lucky to be in coaching ever since. That was 1993. So it's been, 28 years or so that I've been coaching. And when I first became a head coach, it was in 2005. I had been an assistant at Providence College for 7 years. I took over a Division III school in Providence, Rhode Island College. And that was my first head coaching position. And it's not unlike a school like Baruch. I'm sure there are many differences, but it's Rhode Island College is a Division III state school without a ton of money, financial advantages, and a lot of challenges. And I learned, when I first took over as a head coach, I thought so much of what I needed to know was basketball, right? X's and O's, how we're going to run offense, how we're going to defend, what's practice going to look like. As soon as I became a head coach, I realized that probably 75% of what I talked to my team about was leadership based. It was about approach. It was about mentality. It was about how we go about our business. And I'm not just talking, when I'm standing in a team meeting before the season, I'm talking all the time, right? On the floor, in huddles. It was always about focus and effort and competing, and our core principles. And as I started my career as a head coach and continued it, I realized that leadership is probably something I need to take a look at, because we talk about leadership and we all kind of think it's really important. I think we use it as something that's important. I talked to a number of coaches who say, yeah, we didn't have a great year. I wasn't really happy with our leadership, but it's not necessarily something we define or we teach. And I've come to learn that I think it's essential for high-performing teams and for high performance, great leadership. But I also think a lot of the way we go about it is wrong, and it's sort of just relying on a traditional model that maybe we don't question. So that's really the genesis of this. Started a dynamic leadership academy in Providence in 2013 to basically, help younger coaches getting into the business and kind of develop on the leadership side. And then, I've started doing a lot of team training. I've worked with, Coach Alisi's team in the spring and did a lot of stuff in the spring and the summer, especially with COVID over Zoom. So, it's a passion of mine. And I think it's really important. And really where I'm coming from is I don't know that we teach team and leadership as much as we should. I think if we're all involved in athletics, we're very fortunate to get team, right? But at Providence College or at Baruch or at NYU or at Harvard, I don't know that they're teaching team in the classroom. And I think team is really important. I'm just a big believer that it's groups of people that get stuff done, whether it's the lessons you learn on an athletic team or teams of doctors studying a pandemic to try and, help us get out of this mess that we're in. So that's sort of where it all comes from. And, it starts to me with a definition of leadership, because as a basketball coach, I see a lot of buzzwords that we use, like toughness and compete and leadership, that we don't necessarily define. We just, we yell at our guys, well, you need to be tougher. But I don't know if we go about defining it and teaching it the right way. And leadership is one of those. So I want to ask anybody, if you've had a minute to think about it, how would you fill in that blank that's in front of you? What is leadership to you? And understand, I'm a big believer, the more I do this, that leadership is highly contextual. It's highly situational. I don't think there is a right answer, right? I don't, there's not what leadership is for Bob Walsh when I'm the head coach at Rhode Island College, or John Alisi, who's the basketball coach at Baruch, versus somebody else who's in a different situation, could have completely different definitions. So who wants to step up and fill in that blank for me? Anybody look at that, have a definition of leadership, or say to themselves, this is what leadership means to me. Now, we don't want everybody to speak at once, right? Because it gets really, really awkward. So, let's try not to talk over each other. Leadership is blank.
I can give an answer. Yeah, I put leadership is setting the standard.
Setting the standard.
Yeah. Yes.
And what kind of standard?
Just setting the standard for intensity.
Intensity. Great. Now
I got one, Coach.
Go ahead.
I kind of describe it as setting, like Ryan said, setting a certain bar, and influencing, I guess, a group of people, whether that be teammates, peers, whatever, and kind of guide them to reach a direct goal. I'd say, whether that be a championship, whatever it is, kind of lead them in that direction of that goal, and having influence over that group of people.
Influence is a great word for leadership. I heard too, influence and guidance. Really good, right? I mean, I think certainly leadership is influence, not necessarily always positive influence. Would you agree with that?
Yes, Coach.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, you'll get people going the wrong way. Really good. Anybody else? Leadership is what? What is it to you?
Person who's not scared to make all the tough decisions.
Tough decisions. I love it. Making
There's
tough.
a few in the chat as well, Coach.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I have my.
I can read them off if you'd like during some dead time.
No, I just figured it out. I was setting the standard, helping others, challenging. Greg, challenging in what way?
Challenging in that you, whether you're having a good day or bad day, you got to be ready to lead your group, set an example for them, etc. It's not always going to be a smooth road, so it could be challenging at times.
Yeah, so challenging leadership is it's hard, right? It's hard, and I was thinking about it the other way: is are you challenging others, right? It's a great point. Leadership is not easy, and leadership can be lonely, right? You know, it's challenging because, man, sometimes you have to put yourself out on a limb. So, you know, I think just based on the 3 or 4 different comments that we got there, anybody else have anything? I don't want to cut anybody off if anybody else was going to chime in there.
Hey, Bob, this is the athletic director, Heather McCullough. Thank you so much for being on with us tonight, for working it out with John.
Thank
I
you,
would say
Heather.
for me, leadership is leading from the front, and leading with compassion, because every situation that you encounter, whether it's with a student athlete, a colleague, your team, every situation that they encounter is different and how they lead is different. So being able to be adaptable and compassionate to each person's situation to get the best out of them, I think is kind of my leadership style. And so
Yeah.
that's what I would say.
Thank you, Heather. That's terrific. Some great words there, right? Compassion, adaptable, being out front. And it's interesting. I think it was probably one of the athletes mentioned intensity. And it's a great point to how contextual it is, right? When Heather is leading the department, that's a little bit different than when you're leading your soccer team on the field or your basketball team on the court, right? Intensity can be a big part of leadership, but I don't know if every time Heather goes into a meeting with the coaches, that intensity, right? Compassion is a little bit different than intensity. And that's, that kind of illustrates the point to me, is that leadership takes on all sorts of different definitions, and it's extremely situational, right? You have to be aware and you have to be able to adapt, as Heather said. I love that word when it comes to leadership. For me, the way I encourage you to think about leadership is think of it as a skill and not a rank. I think one of the mistakes we make with leadership, and I think it's sort of the traditional model, is that leadership is a position, right? It's the captain, it is the senior, it is the best player, right? I think leadership is a skill that you can teach. You know, I think if you want to be an athletic director, you have to understand how to lead in that context. If you want to be a valuable member of the swim team or the soccer team, you have to be able to lead in that context. If you're in charge of facilities and you have to lead a staff, you have to be able to lead in that context. So the definition that I've chosen for our teams for leadership is to make the people around you better, right? That's the definition that we've used with my teams. It fits me, right? It's very accessible, which I think is important. You know, it's accessible to everybody, right? Everybody can make other people better. You can do it in your own way, into your own personality, which I also think is really important. But I would encourage you as an athlete or a coach, a captain, whether you're going to be a freshman on a team or you're going to be a senior on a team, to figure out what leadership means for you and how you can contribute. Our definition is just making people better, and that can happen a lot of ways. And what's important to me with our teams is it's required of everybody. It's not something that the captains do or the seniors do, because again, I think it's a skill you can teach. I think it's a skill you can teach just like one-touch passing in soccer. I think it's a skill you can teach just like, you know, ball handling in basketball. It's not something that's gained through status. And that's where I think as coaches, and I know I'm still learning how to teach it, you know, we don't look at it that way. We think, if we think leadership is really important on our teams and it has value that's going to lead to our desired result, then we should define it and figure out how to teach it. So I think it's a core value. It should be. And for me, core values are behaviors. And that's really important. It's not a sign on the wall. It's not a slogan on the back of a t-shirt. I think you have to define it as behaviors. So for me, if my definition is make the people around you better, well, what do those behaviors look like that are associated with it? Because I think a lot of us get into that trap of, well, we need more leadership. Well, what does that mean, right? Does that mean yelling at the guys when they're not playing well? Does that mean, making sure everybody knows the plays when we're running them, in practice? Does that mean everybody shows up 15 minutes early to get in the pool to stretch or warm up? So define it as behavior. Examples like getting to practice 15 minutes early and grabbing one of the freshmen, right? I'm a junior on the Baruch basketball team. Hey guys, practice is at 4, but we're usually on the floor at 3:45 doing skill work, right? That's making your teammates better. Somebody, you send somebody in on a breakaway with a great pass and they miss the net, and they feel awful, right? Hey, get it back. All right. Mark up, let's go. Let's get back on defense. Keep your head up. That's making them better. Getting them to class on time, knocking on their door, getting them up, all of that stuff. You're at a party and things are going down, it's not looking good. There might be a fight breaking out. Hey, let's get out of here. Right. Just associate behaviors with your values and with your definition of leadership. And I think that's really important. So it becomes something that you and your team are willing to fight for. And I've always felt like I can tell you probably who your team leaders are, right? In general, team leaders are 3 people. They're older players, they're better players, and they're louder players. And again, if you think of it as a skill and not a rank, it's not something that has anything to do with how old you are. Certainly experience might help your leadership approach without question, but it's something you develop. It's not something you achieve. You don't earn status as a leader. I would hope if you asked one of my teams at Rhode Island College or Maine, if you walked in and said, who are the leaders here? The answer would be everyone, right? That's what they would say. Everyone leads on this team. Our captains on our teams had technical responsibilities, and that was it. I understand being a captain is important. I don't diminish that. But if by definition I'm asking my captains to lead, or I'm asking, 2 or 3 people to lead other people, I'm asking the other people not to lead as much. And I don't want to do that. I have a couple of examples. When I was at Rhode Island College, I had a point guard named Antone Gray who started for me for 4 years and played in 4 straight NCAA tournaments. And he's now an assistant coach at Brown. He also worked for me at Maine. And when he was a freshman, halfway through the year, we were struggling, not playing great. And I was talking to him. He's like, yeah, coach, I just don't feel comfortable speaking up because I don't feel like this is my team. Now, Antone is the best leader I have ever coached. And he's also the smartest player I've ever coached. And I thought to myself, man, like, what am I doing wrong if the environment I'm creating where I have a kid who's got the ball in his hands, who's the best leader I've ever coached, and he doesn't feel comfortable leading? Like, there's something wrong with that model. He played with a center, Mike Akinrola, who was a senior, who was a first-team All-League 2 years in a row, the best center in the league, quiet kid, played his ass off, competed every day, but didn't really want any part of being a leader in the traditional sense, right? He wasn't going to talk to the guys and get them going before practice. He wasn't going to yell in a huddle. It just wasn't in his personality. And I thought, so here I am, I'm trying to force feed leadership on a senior because he's older and he's a good player when he's not comfortable with it. And I've got an environment where my freshman, who's dying to lead and is great at it, isn't doing it. I think as athletes, you have to ask yourself, who are you willing to listen to? And on your team, who can lead you? If a freshman came in and was starting to, give you some direction and speak up, are you willing to hear that? And that's an important dynamic on teams when it comes to leadership. So ultimately, I'm not a believer in the traditional leadership model, which is top down, head coach, assistant coaches, 3 captains, they tell everybody what to do. I think the value of leadership is to empower your team from within, empower the middle, whether it's a law firm or an athletic department or, a lacrosse team. everybody on that team is a primary stakeholder. And in fact, if I'm the head coach, certainly I have an impact on what we're doing, but the decisions are being made when I can't really affect them, right? They're out on the floor and the ball goes up and I don't have the ability to stop and make them do it again. So what you want is, the power to make those decisions with the primary stakeholders on your team. Those team members are accountable to each other for your leadership development. And ultimately, I think that leads to ownership, which is really the highest level of investment that you can get to. So let me stop right there and ask for any thoughts or questions. I have been asked, I will share this PowerPoint. So, if there's something that interests you and you don't have to scurry to write something down. I mean, I'll share this information with Coach and he can spread it out to everybody who wants it. So you don't have to worry about that. But anybody have any thoughts or questions about anything that resonates with you, what I've said, anything you want to challenge me on? What thoughts do you have?
I agree with kind of like empowering everybody, making everybody feel accountable.
And who is this talking?
This is Ryan Panagakos.
Ryan, awesome. Okay, go ahead. So you feel you.
What resonated with me was like, if you're on a team, there can't be really one true leader, two true leaders. I feel like everybody has to be a leader in their own sense. Everybody has to be accountable for, how they practice, how they play, what they eat. They have to be accountable for their own, just life in general. And that transitions into sports, obviously.
Now, Ryan, on the teams that you've been on, do you think all your teammates or most of your teammates are willing to accept that type of model where, maybe somebody who, is new to the program, is trying to lead in certain ways? Is that acceptable? Or have the teams been sort of top down, hey, we're the juniors, we're the seniors, we tell everybody what to do?
It was, yeah. I mean, at my high school, at least, it was pretty uncommon for a freshman or a sophomore to come in and just try to start leading. It was, you didn't really see that too much.
Yeah. What high school did you go to?
Holy Cross in Queens.
Nice. I actually, Keith Hamilton, and so his dad, Kevin Hamilton, played at Iona, but Keith Hamilton played for me, was a Holy Cross guy, was coaching at Holy Cross for a while too. So, and that's the interesting thing, right? We're not used to that. And I don't mean the freshmen and the sophomores have to come in, and yell and scream and tell people what to do. And that kind of goes back to the definition, right? Is there a way to define it so that everybody can do it? A freshman or a sophomore, might just show up 15 minutes early every day to work on their skills and get better. So, I appreciate that, Ryan. Anybody else? And any other thoughts on that? Because the challenge with that, right, empowering everybody to do it, is everybody on the team has to be willing to accept it, right? And it's somewhat uncommon because there's this status. You feel like, okay, I'm a junior, I'm a senior, I've been around, I start, I'm the one that gets to speak up. And I think that just twists the leadership model in the wrong direction. So. Any other thoughts about what Ryan said or anything you've heard so far, or questions?
Hi, Bob. It's Heather again.
Yes.
And for the group, I just think it also lends itself a little bit to self-awareness, and kind of like where they're coming from and where they can lead others to. And so if you're not really comfortable with yourself and kind of taking direction, but understanding that you yourself can't lead necessarily, sometimes it's coming from a place of humility where you understand that, hey, I can learn something from, the girl next to me. I was a coach for several years, obviously too. And it's, how do I make the person next to me better than me? How does that happen? And you turn it into almost a competitive model, but a healthy competitive model. And I think that goes for leadership as well, because in the same token, you're kind of building the team at the same time that you're kind of honing your own leadership and letting others around you kind of gravitate towards you. And it doesn't always mean coming in yelling and screaming. It's, to your point, about modeling by example. Like, hey, I just want to show up 15 minutes ahead of time. I want to be prepared. I want to be on the court, on the field, at, in the pool on time, because that's a value that I have. And getting people to kind of understand those same values, while it's a thread within a team, sometimes there are outliers who don't kind of match up with those same values. And so that's where I think the balance tips left or right. And that's where the coach comes in terms of recruitment, because then you're kind of recruiting student athletes who hold the same values as the department, as that team, as that college, so that you kind of get that level of leadership and fellowship that you need.
Yeah, that's terrific. And there's an acceptance level that's really important, that creates a comfort level, right? If you're one of the older players on your team, and you're willing to listen, you're willing to consider a different approach, you're curious about the mentality of your teammates, right? Maybe, your coach is somebody who's really intense and gets after you, and you better be ready all the time. And a couple of players on your team don't react well to being yelled at, and making them comfortable. So, it's really, the acceptance part of it is really important, because I don't know that many of us has been brought up on teams. Like most of the teams, there's a status level to being older, right? And being better. So and Heather, you made a great point, right? It's not just coming in and speaking up. One of the things we did with our teams at Maine, where leadership was an issue when I first got there, was everybody took on a leadership responsibility, and this is something the athletes can do themselves, right? If you're on the soccer team or the swim team or the basketball team, give everybody one responsibility within your program, and just let everybody choose it. Somebody's in charge of the training room, right? So that athlete knows what time the training room opens, what time it closes. If we have to schedule when people are getting taped, you're reminding guys, hey, you're getting taped at 3:15. You're getting, one athlete's in charge of the basketballs, right? One athlete's in charge of the gym. One athlete's in charge of study hall. There's a ton of responsibilities around your program that everybody can take on, where it's just, okay, study hall is a certain time, you're in charge of reminding it. And that way, if somebody misses study hall, obviously that person's going to be held accountable, but I'm also going to go to whoever's in charge of that leadership responsibility and say, hey, what happened, right? And create ways where people get comfortable taking responsibility and taking ownership. Because what I'm always trying to get to, and this is something I learned at Rhode Island College from my players, and this is actually a big part of the book that I wrote about the culture we built, is there's a big difference between compliant teams and teams that take ownership. And if you have, 2 or 3 people telling everybody what to do, they are going to get really good at doing what they're told. And I don't think that's a path towards elite achievement, right? I think that you can be good if you have good players on whatever team you're on, and everybody does what they're told and they're a good coach, you can be good. I think where teams really take off is when they take ownership. And quite honestly, I learned that from my players at Rhode Island College and kind of happened upon it. We all think leadership is having control. I think leadership is giving control, right? So if you can get everybody on your team to take ownership and be fully invested, I think you have a chance to not only be elite, but to sustain that success. And it's a shared responsibility to live up to your standards. I think Ryan talked about setting the standard in his definition of leadership. So it's not always me as the head coach that has to say, okay, that's not good enough, get on the line, right? It should get to the point where you're saying that to each other. If somebody shows up 1 minute before practice and they're just tying their sneakers and running in and, because they were hanging out in the training room, like, hey, we don't do that here. Like, we're in practice early, right? And those standards and that jersey that you wear that represent those standards, that's worth fighting for. right? For your team. So a big part of the leadership model is creating and then taking ownership. And I think that is harder to do if a couple of people are telling everybody else what to do, right? You become, if I told you to jump through a hoop, you jump through a hoop. Great. But, if I tell you, here's the level we need to compete at to beat, the College of Staten Island, like, what that means, and you go out and take ownership of it, there's a big difference. And now I'm a firm believer that it creates a meritocracy within teams. And merit to me is the only currency that great teams share. It doesn't matter, how heavily recruited you were, or how many points you scored last year, or, whether you start or you come off the bench. Meritocracies, you're known by your deeds. What have you done today? What have you done to help this team today? That's the currency to me that elite teams share. And if you're willing to accept a different approach to leadership, I think you create a higher level of ownership that really allows your team to explode. So communication and connection. I mentioned this. This is a quote from Jack Clark, who's the rugby coach at Cal, who's he's the best I've ever heard as far as speaking on leadership and team building. And, the best leaders have the mental capacity to be curious about their teammates, which I think is a really interesting way to look at it, right? How curious are you about the people around you? The ability to listen is probably the most important and underused skill in leadership. And there's a really interesting study done at MIT on high performing teams where they put small groups together and gave them difficult tasks and asked them just to complete the task. And the high performing teams, they didn't know each other. They were three things. They were empathetic towards one another. So it was kind of understanding of what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes. They gave everybody equal time. So it wasn't, two people saying, hey, this is how we're going to do this, right? Everybody had equal time. And interestingly enough, the majority of the high performing teams had more women on them than men. And there was a social connectedness to that was really important, and what they called social capital, right? The willingness to get to know, the willingness to help and to connect is called, they called it social capital. That was really important on these teams. And that's really how trust was built, right? Was with social capital and willingness to get to know your teammates, willingness to help your teammates is a connection that can be really, really strong. And it creates a trust that I think is essential for high performing teams. And think about the way you communicate, because I think the way you communicate is a precursor to whether or not you actually connect. And I've learned this about teams, and I've had my teams recently do this, come up with a plan for how we're going to communicate, right? As coaches, we say it all the time. I mean, I was in practice today. We got to communicate more. We got to talk more. We're not talking enough. Well, how are we going to go about it, right? Be intentional about it. How do you deliver and receive the message? If I'm a senior and I jog back on defense and a freshman gets on me for it, am I going to say, man, why is don't yell at me. You're a freshman. Leave me alone. Or am I willing to say, yeah, you know what? I wasn't playing hard enough. He's right. In the sports world, what we do is intense. And context really matters, right? And that's, again, a little different than maybe the way Heather has to carry herself in a staff meeting. There's an understanding that, yeah, with 5 minutes to go in the championship game against York or CSI, we don't have time to have a meeting and take a vote, right? We have to communicate directly. I might have to say, hey, get back on defense. Let's go. We need you, and we have to be willing to not only listen, but to communicate that way. Ask yourself if communication on your team causes more problems than it resolves. Because I think on so many teams, the way you communicate actually causes more problems than it resolves because it's not discussed enough. Conflict is going to be there if candor is safe, right? If you're allowed to speak up. So getting to a point where you can communicate directly and honestly about it, about key issues is really important.
I think one thing, Bob, I'm sorry to interject, but
no, not at all, please.
I think one of the things, and that just kind of, if maybe you can just pop back to that other slide, I think one of the things that you really point out in terms of communication and conflict, if you ask anybody, most people don't really like to sit in conflict. And, part of that comes from vulnerability, like where do you feel the safe candor? Where do you feel like you can be vulnerable with your decisions or your communication or your mode of communication? And then you add the introversion and the extroversion and what that chemistry is, that chemistry they talk about teams have, I think kind of goes back to, doing the work of self-awareness. I think we get these young individuals, 17, 18, 19 years old, and they haven't kind of been taught, so to speak, kind of how to look inward and how to manage emotions. We know how to, they're taught how to manipulate their physical attributes to be the best of the best, but they don't necessarily know how to manage their mental attributes or their self-awareness or their self-consciousness to really excel in the world of the psychological part of their sport. That's what I feel.
That's a terrific point. And actually, vulnerability and safety are and they're part of this next slide. Actually, it's interesting that you brought that up because that's a huge part to me of leadership, is creating a safe place, right? Where you can, compete without compromise, which is a quote from Jim Steen, who was the coach at Kenyon swimming. But to create a safe place as a leader, you have to be willing to be vulnerable, to show vulnerability to your teammates, to your team. As a coach, I have to be willing to say, you know what, guys, I screwed up. I tried, this is what we're going to do. It didn't work. I should have done something different. I have to get better. When you're struggling, right? There's a terrific book by Daniel Coyle, who wrote The Talent Code, but he also wrote the Culture Code. And Heather, I don't know if you've read it, but it is really, so he basically studied like 6 different cultures. The San Antonio Spurs are one of them, like elite cultures. And a big part of what he talks about at the beginning is about vulnerability and safety, right? And creating a place where we can communicate the way we need to communicate, where, it's okay for me to lay it on the line because I might fail, right? It creates a level of competitive excellence where we're not just competing and saying we're playing hard, but we can handle the emotions of it, right? So, man, if you're a teammate and you're willing to show some vulnerability, especially to your younger teammates, right, where they realize like, oh, it's okay to make a mistake here. It's okay to be myself here. It's okay to show weakness here, right? That's really, really valuable to the comfort level, to the ability to compete. And I would never have connected the two when I was younger as a coach, right? Competing and chemistry and some of that stuff that, you referred to was all about team and how hard we go and the way we work and the intensity and rah, rah, rah. Such a big part of it is being vulnerable. And I think, separating yourself from the results as much as possible, which is okay, but also hard to do. Embracing adversity, and conflict. Confrontation to me is an essential part of leadership, and I don't mean confrontation like, okay, we're going to start fighting or we're going to, push and shove each other, in the paint, after a hard foul. I'm just talking about being willing to confront bad behavior, right? The wrong behavior. And creating the environment where you can do that has a big impact on your ability to have elite success. And, we call it full measure, which is to me, the gift you get out of team sports, right? It's that time at the end of the game where you can put your arm around your teammate and know, I gave you everything I had. Win or lose, I gave you everything I had. And they're saying the same for you. So that's really good stuff, Heather. I appreciate it. Any of the athletes that are on, any thoughts? Anybody else? Questions or thoughts about some of that, how that looks, and is that something you're comfortable with? You've been a part of? Does it resonate with you? All right. Are any of the athletes still with us? Are you still awake? Are you
Here.
nice? All right. So adversity, and this is something that kind of a mentality we were able to take. And I look, Division III, there's something really special about Division III because of how pure it is. It's also can be very challenging, certainly financially, you don't have a lot of bells and whistles. I found that the challenges that we had at Rhode Island College, and essentially I went from the Big East to the Little East, pun intended, but that was the name of the league. Rhode Island College is in the Little East. And I knew we weren't getting, more money in the budget. We weren't going to travel and stay overnight. Like it was, we weren't going to ask for anything. But it became part of kind of the core of who we were because we didn't have a choice. Right. And I know Baruch has a lot of challenges. I mean, I know that league, I know, most of the athletes have long commutes and, it's, there are just honestly a lot of challenges that can become such a big part of your culture and will have such a huge impact on your ability to succeed when you leave college, when you go to take a job, when you face challenges moving forward. The obstacles that that are in front of you create resilience. They create mental toughness. They create pride. They create a togetherness, a core ethos of your team that will line you up for success. And the phrase that we used was win anyway, right? It was, foul trouble, win anyway, right? The gym is cold, the heat's not working, win anyway. They didn't sweep the floor today, win anyway. It's two of our, our starting center midfielder is injured, win anyway, right? It just became a mentality that, look, this is who we are. We are going to accept it. And we are going to embrace it. And it made us tougher. It made us better. Like it got to the point where if I was kind of upset about something or complaining about something or, the bus was late or whatever, our guys would be like, don't worry, coach, we're good. Like we got this, we're fine. And the mentality we took on was grateful for everything and entitled to nothing. And that's, I think entitlement is poison to high performing teams and it's easily accessible. It doesn't take long to feel entitled. Like I had, and this was after my second year at Rhode Island College, we went to the Elite Eight. And the following year, I kind of noticed like, okay, our guys kind of feel like, well, we just show up and throw the jerseys out there and we're going to be pretty good. Like there was a sense of entitlement at a, Division III state school that, where there wasn't a lot of glory. I mean, we were playing for pride and, so there's entitlement available anywhere if you want it. And fighting that immediately and sort of combating it as a group and as individuals, I think is really important. So it will become part of your core, part of your ethos that makes you better. and it's, heck, I mean, with what we're going through right now, you know, like COVID-19 is a level of adversity that nobody, you know, could have foreseen coming. So how do you handle that? You know, what do you do? How do you take it on, and turn it into something that's valuable to your organization? So, any thoughts or questions about that? I'd like to ask here from one of the athletes, anybody, what have been the biggest challenges for you with regards to your team throughout this pandemic? I mean, obviously, I know, you know, games have been canceled, practices, seasons, right? I know you're, but what challenges does that create, and how are you dealing with it?
I can input something.
Yeah. Who's this?
My name is Isabella Mansour. I'm on the tennis team at Baruch.
Isabella, I appreciate you speaking up.
Yeah, no problem. Honestly, like there's obviously a lot of negatives right now, but what the tennis team has been doing in particular, we've been meeting consistently every Friday, just for a follow up. Even there's no like big news to talk about. The whole team, usually if you know everyone's available at the time, nothing interferes. Usually that happens. We all just talk. Coach, I don't know if he's in the chat in the Zoom right now, but he's always, you know, he always has something to tell us, always either inspiring or, you know, important news, always following up. And then especially our captains on the team, always, you know, following up on important things for us to do. You know, occasionally the near future, whether it's next semester or next year, comes up in terms of if we're going to play or not, but it's usually always hopeful. So all we can really do right now is just stay consistent, you know, get out and play ourselves on our own time. But yeah, I just appreciate us meeting still, even though we can't physically be together.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate it, Isabella. Right. So, I mean, we take for granted the ability to interact with our teams every day, don't we? Like just that, you know, just the feeling you get, right? You see your teammates after class, you're a little tired, you're hungry, you know, you're grabbing food, whatever it is, you know, getting out on the court, getting out on the field. You know, so how do you stay connected, right? How do you make sure that it, like, you know, the interactions, the sharing of emotions, that to me is one of the biggest challenges, right? Is, you know, we are able to let go of our emotions with our teams every day. Well, now we can't do that. You know, like I can go into the gym and, you know, joke around with a couple of players and, you know, we'll be talking about something that happened at practice yesterday, or this was a bad call or something in the game on film. And we'll go back and forth, and, you know, frustration with the coaches, you know, you're able to get it off your chest. You know, we don't have the same way of sharing that emotion, good and bad, with the people that, you know, we compete with. And that is really impactful. So finding ways to stay connected and communicating that is really important. I appreciate you sharing that, Isabella.
Yeah.
Anybody else? What about the impact? Somebody from another team, you know, the impact of COVID, and can you turn it into a positive? You know, can you still look at this as something where you say, okay, this is going to make us better down the road, and approach it that way?
Yeah, Bob, you know, as you're talking here and I'm looking at the slide, I think whenever this ends, and we, you know, don't know when that's going to be, whenever we do get back to our teams and our seasons, we're going to be expected to win anyway, right? COVID can't be an excuse for us to have any kind of slippage in our standards, our expectations for ourselves, our teammates. You know, I think this is really challenging, and I think shows how much leadership is needed to how do we continue to improve individually and as a team, because at some point we are hopefully going to get back to normal. And there's not going to be any asterisk if we don't, live up to our expectations because of COVID-19. We still have to continue to find ways to improve, individually and as groups.
Yeah, and there's, I always say it, there are no accommodations made in the standings for misfortune, right? At the end of the day, you lose a couple of people to injury, one team ends up first, one team ends up in the championship, one team ends up in the NCAA tournament. And your point about your standards is a good one. How can you, you can't let your standards slip or your adherence to your standards slip. Well, how can you make your adherence to your standards even better, right? Like how much more, is this something where you say, you know what, maybe I took that for granted. Like I'll guarantee you, and you may not think of it, for the athletes, but like you're going to miss the day where a coach, blew the whistle and put you on the line and made you run or held you accountable in their way for doing something that was below standard, right? For missing class or for being late or whatever it is, right? You are going to miss that, right? 10 years from now, you will give anything to get back on the line with your teammates for early morning conditioning or, study hall or whatever it is. So can you embrace this to the point where you say to your teammates, you know what, we got to do a better job with this. What are 2 or 3 things that we could do better? Like, I know coach says he wants us in early to do a little bit of extra work, but we don't really get there, or we don't go that hard at it, or we always have an excuse. Like, what are 2 or 3 things that you can do better because of this, right? Because like when we do get back, they're going to crown, champions, right? They're going to be, and everybody's going through it. So, it's a mentality that I think, sometimes it's come across based on past experience, right? If you've had challenging, difficult situations that you've had to overcome in the past, maybe it's ingrained in you a little bit. But it's something that I'm pretty sure you and your team can take on mentally to create sort of a higher level of expectation and a higher level of ownership to, does your coach always, one of the best things that happened to me at Rhode Island College, this was my first year. I got hired in September. I was coach for 2 weeks, and I went recruiting one day. It was like middle of September. The guys were playing pickup on their own. I didn't get to see them. The next day, my one senior walked in, and I said, "Hey, KP, how were the games yesterday?" And he was like, "Oh, coach, they were garbage." And I was like, "Really?" And he was like, "Yeah, guys weren't playing hard. It was just, there was a lot of arguing, a lot of BS. It was bad." And I just said, I would just kind of off the cuff said, "Well, what are we going to do about it?" And he said, "Oh, we got up at 7 a.m. this morning and ran." And I was like, wow. Like, I was just kind of, I was half joking, like, okay, what are we going to do about it? Like, let me see if he takes on the responsibility, and that's when I was like, man, like that's pretty special, right? Like, do you take care of your standards, right? Before your coach has to, right? Have you ever said to your coach, yeah, don't worry, coach, we got this. Like I took care of it, man, I bet you can come out of this entire experience with a higher level of ownership, for sure. So
Yeah, and Bob, that speaks to, the whole accountability piece. It's, I live my personal life on this, and character is who you are when nobody's watching. Just because coach isn't there doesn't mean I shouldn't do the 15, push-ups that are prescribed for the captain's practice that day. That's where we fall short, I think, in teaching the young adults the level of accountability that they have to accept and own in terms of ownership. It's like, who are you and who do you want to be when nobody's watching? Do you want to be garbage pickup, or do you want to be elite pickup?
Right.
Regardless of the level of play, it shouldn't change. You still show up as the same person, the same individual, to your point about, how do we improve, or John's point about how do you improve individually and as a group collectively, so that you can excel as a team, as a unit, moving forward. And that's where I think sometimes it falls short. It's like sometimes, not all student athletes, I'm not kind of like blanketing it, but what can I get away with? If I have this elite talent versus, I work really hard every day to be who I am. And yet those two don't kind of meet in the middle sometimes when you're on a team. And I think that creates some of the divide when the coach isn't around, so to speak.
Absolutely. And if you want to be an elite achiever, a high performer, if you want to be highly successful, you will learn to crave accountability, right? You will miss it when it's gone. You really will. And honestly, the best feeling for me as a coach, and the reason why I do it, is when I get a text message 5 years later, 7 years later, somebody comes back to a game and says, "Coach, thank you for holding me accountable. Like, I'm so far ahead of the game at my job, with my family, with my kids, because I am used to being held accountable to a high standard." And I would suggest that every athlete that's on this call, every team, can take on more responsibility with regards to that, and you will see the benefit long term. It's not just about, certainly not just about trying to win our next game. So just to wrap it up a little bit here, and then I'll certainly take any questions. This is why it's important to me. I just think the world is attracted to strong leadership. Like, one of the best things I can hear about somebody I'm recruiting is, yeah, he's a great leader, right? Or he makes his teammates better. Whether you're trying to go to graduate school, get a job, playing on teams, whatever it is, high performing teams all benefit from great leadership. And I think there's a void of it. I really do. I am amazed at how many people that I come across who are in leadership positions, vice president, president, head coach, in these positions where they're in charge of a group of people who don't really get it, or who don't really understand it. So it's character development, like Heather said, and it separates you. It will separate you as you try to, move forward, whether it's your freshman year in college as an athlete, playing on your team, or moving forward. The responsibility of leadership will separate you without question. And that's why I think it's important. You can, one of the best things you can have if you're a college athlete is when it's over, your coach, you're applying for a job and your coach is a reference, and they call and your coach says, "She was a great leader for us," right? Like, she was the one we always counted on. She was really reliable. I'm just a firm believer that will separate you. And that's why I think it's important, beyond the impact that it will have on your team. So my information is on the screen. Like I said, I will share this, the presentation with Heather and with Coach Alisi. John was nice enough to mention I did write a book, which is going to come out in December. It's called Entitled to Nothing. The website will be active shortly, but feel free to send me an email if there's a question or something you didn't want to bring up maybe on the chat. Stay in touch with me, and who's got questions for me now? Anybody with any questions or conversations about some of the stuff that we've talked about? Happy to continue to discuss. All right. Well, it sounds like everybody's so captivated by it that they want to spend some time thinking about it. But no, in all seriousness, it's been an hour. I appreciate the time. I love the discussions because I've got notes from, what many of you have talked about. And, you know, Coach Alisi is a good friend. I understand sometimes the struggle at the Division III level. So I'll certainly be rooting for you. And I appreciate you spending some time with me. I've really enjoyed it.